The first night in that house, I should have trusted my instincts. It was too quiet. You know the way most houses have a kind of rhythm? A refrigerator hum, pipes settling, traffic outside? This place had none of that. It was silence so heavy, it almost pressed on my ears. I told myself it was fine. After all, I had been desperate for a place, and the rent was suspiciously low. I signed the lease without asking enough questions. I didn't care about the stains on the carpet or the wallpaper peeling like old skin. All I cared about was that it was mine. But that first night, every sound carved itself into me. The creak of the stairs when I carried up my boxes, the slam of the old windows when the wind shifted, and most of all, the floorboards. They groaned. Every step, every shift of weight, like the house was complaining I was there at all. Still, I told myself, old houses creak, that's what they do. But in the back of my mind there was this whisper. What if it's creaking when you're not moving? Have you ever laid in bed and heard a noise so distinct you almost swore someone else was in the room? That's what it was like. At first I laughed it off. I texted my friend, told him the house sounded like it was alive, that it was probably haunted. He replied with a skull emoji. I laughed, set my phone down, and told myself to stop being dramatic. But lying there in the dark, it hit me. Haunted houses are predictable. They have patterns, strange cold spots, a door that always slams, lights that flicker. This house didn't follow any rules. The silence was broken at random. A thud in the walls, a long dragging sound under the floorboards, then nothing for hours, then again, out of nowhere. It wasn't a rhythm, it was chaos. And chaos is so much worse, because you can't prepare for it. I remember lying awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between creaks. I thought maybe it was the pipes. Or maybe the house was settling. That's what people always say, right? It's just the house settling. But then, I felt it. The vibration, a low, almost imperceptible shift in the mattress. Like something was moving beneath me. I froze. I held my breath so hard my chest ached. The sound stopped. The vibration stilled. I waited 30 seconds, a minute, 5, nothing. Eventually I convinced myself I imagined it. Maybe my pulse in my ears, maybe the wind rattling the frame. So I let myself drift off, but that was only night one. Here's what I want you to think about. If you moved into a place like that, and on the very first night it felt like something was moving under your bed, would you pack your bags right then? Or would you push it down, the way I did, and pretend everything was fine? Because once you tell yourself it's nothing, you can't take that back. And from then on, the house owns you. Morning came, and sunlight made everything seem normal again. That's the cruelest trick of all. How the daylight makes you feel stupid for being scared. The kitchen smelled faintly of old coffee from the previous tenant. The wallpaper looked less like peeling skin and more like just bad taste. But when I walked across the living room, I noticed one thing I hadn't the night before. A board near the hallway was loose. Just one plank of wood, slightly raised, like it had been pried open. And the dust around it? Disturbed, like someone had been there, recently. I didn't know then what it meant, but I know now. That was the first sign, the first warning I ignored, the first piece of proof that the silence in that house wasn't empty at all. It was waiting. The loose floorboard bothered me, but not enough. I told myself it was just age. I told myself I was imagining things. But over the next week, little inconsistencies started adding up. It began with food. I'd open the fridge, and something would be missing. A carton of eggs that was half full would be nearly empty. A container of leftovers, gone. At first, I thought it was me. Maybe I ate more than I remembered. Maybe I tossed it and forgot. That happens, right? But then, it escalated. I bought a pack of granola bars. I'm the kind of person who eats one a day, maybe two if I'm stressed. By the third morning, the entire box was gone. Gone. Like it had never existed. And I knew I hadn't eaten them all. I actually started wondering if I was sleepwalking. That's how badly I wanted an explanation. So I did something ridiculous. I left notes for myself. Post-its on the fridge. Don't eat this after 10 p.m. Post-its on the counter. Remember, you already had dinner. The next morning, the notes were still there, but the food was gone, and the handwriting. This is the part I never told anyone before. One of the post-its had writing that wasn't mine, just a single word, scrawled in shaky, jagged letters. It said, "Thanks." At that point, I started paying closer attention, not just to the food, but to the objects around me. My toothbrush was moved, not by much, just a few inches to the left of where I always put it. The remote control appeared on the couch one morning, even though I distinctly remembered setting it on the coffee table before bed. Once, I left my bedroom door wide open before sleeping and woke up to find it shut. And here's the part that really chilled me. Sometimes, when I came home from work, the chain on the inside of the door was latched, but that chain, that lock, could only be fastened from inside. So here's the question I want you to ask yourself. If you noticed little things moving around your home, food missing, locks behaving in ways they shouldn't, would you call the police? Or would you hesitate, like I did, afraid they'd laugh in your face? Because the truth is, once you admit it out loud, there's no going back. You either face the possibility someone's been inside your home, or you keep lying to yourself until it's too late. I tried to distract myself. I told myself work was stressful, that I was tired, that my brain was playing tricks. But then the smells started. One night, I came home, and the whole house smelled faintly of sweat. Not mine, someone else's. Another night, it smelled like cheap cologne, that heavy, choking kind of cologne that clings to everything. But the worst was the cigarette smoke. It was strong, too strong to be drifting in from outside. I don't smoke. Nobody in my family smokes. And yet, in the dead of night, lying in bed, I could smell it as if someone was standing over me, exhaling. I remember pulling the blanket up to my chin and holding my breath, praying it would fade. And eventually, it did. But in the morning, when I opened the window, there was ash on the sill, gray flakes, like someone had been smoking inside my room while I slept. By now, I knew I couldn't ignore it, but I was too scared to confront it. So I tried to create little tests. I put objects in precise places just to see if they moved. A mug balanced on the edge of the counter. A chair angled exactly toward the window. And the next morning, they'd be different. Subtly. The mug was pushed back. The chair turned toward the hallway. Not accidents, not coincidence. It was proof. Proof that someone, or something, was in my space when I wasn't looking. And here's the part that really eats at me. Every time something moved, it wasn't random. It was closer to me, step by step, room by room, closer to where I slept. That's when the paranoia set in. I started losing sleep. I started hearing noises in every silence, shadows in every corner. I told myself, if it happens again, I'll call the landlord, or the police, or someone. But the truth is, I was already trapped. Because once you suspect someone else might be in your home, you start questioning every sound, every movement, every breath that isn't yours. And once that thought gets into your head, there's no safe place left. That was the second challenge. Do you keep pretending nothing's wrong? Or do you open the door to the horrifying truth? I chose wrong. I chose to pretend. And because of that, things only got worse. By the third week, the house stopped feeling like mine. I'd come home from work, set down my bag, and immediately, my shoulders would tense. My ears would strain. I wasn't listening for the usual sounds of a house. The pipes, the wind, the hum of the fridge. I was listening for him. And that's when the noises began. It started subtle, scratching beneath the floorboards. A slow, dragging sound, like fingernails on wood. Sometimes it was a tap, tap, tap. Sometimes it was a long groan of wood straining under weight. And the worst part, it only ever happened at night. I'd be lying in bed, eyes wide open in the dark, trying to convince myself it was just the house settling. When I'd hear it, directly underneath me, scratching, shuffling, breathing. One night, I actually whispered out loud, "Hello?" My own voice sounded ridiculous in that silence. And for a moment, it stopped. No scratching, no dragging, just nothing. I told myself I was crazy. I rolled over, closed my eyes, tried to force myself to sleep, but then the smell hit me. Cigarette smoke, heavy, acrid. So close, it felt like someone was exhaling directly into my face. And I don't smoke. I never have. I shot up in bed coughing. The room looked empty, but the smell, it was everywhere. In my sheets, in my hair, filling my lungs. I checked the window. It was shut tight. Checked the hallway, empty. But the moment I opened my door, I saw it. A faint trail of ash, leading down the hallway, toward the loose floorboard I'd noticed weeks before. What would you do if you smelled smoke in a house where no one smoked? Would you tell yourself it drifted in from outside? Or would you admit the truth that someone was inside with you, so close they could leave ash behind? Because I couldn't admit it, not yet, and because I didn't, I gave him more time. Every night after that, the noises grew bolder, louder. I'd hear soft thumps under the floorboards, like knees or elbows hitting wood. Sometimes muffled coughing. Once, I swear I heard humming. Imagine lying in your bed, hearing a stranger hum a song under your floor. A song you can't place. Off key, too low to make out the words, but you know it's there. That was my reality. Every single night. And still I stayed. I started avoiding home. I'd stay late at work, drive around aimlessly, spend hours at coffee shops just to put off going back. But eventually I'd have to. And every time I opened the door, there was a new sign. My shoes moved slightly out of line. The bathroom mirror streaked as if someone had wiped it with a wet hand. The blanket on my bed pulled tighter than I ever made it. He wasn't just there. He was aware of me, watching me, leaving reminders that I wasn't imagining it. The smells became the worst part. Sweat, smoke, that rancid sour smell of someone who hasn't showered in too long. Once I came home and gagged immediately. The whole house reeked of rotten food. And when I checked the trash, it was full of wrappers I'd never bought, brands I didn't eat, crushed up fast food bags, empty cans of cheap beer. He was living there, comfortably, like it was his home, and I was the intruder. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispering, not loud enough to make out the words, but steady, like a conversation. I pressed my ear to the floor, and what I heard still makes my stomach twist to this day. He was repeating my name, over and over and over, like a prayer, like a warning, like he was trying to remind himself who he belonged to. So tell me, would you stay in that house one more night? Would you grab your keys, run out the door, never look back? Or would you be like me, frozen between denial and fear, telling yourself tomorrow you'll deal with it, while tonight you just try to survive? That was my third mistake. I let it go on. And because I did, he grew bold enough to leave me his first gift. The first gift appeared on a Tuesday morning. I woke up, rolled over, and there it was, lying on my nightstand, right next to my phone, a Polaroid photograph. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was grainy, faded, a little underexposed. But then my stomach dropped, because it was a picture of me, asleep, in my own bed, taken from just a few feet away. I stared at that photo for minutes, frozen. My first thought wasn't even fear. It was disbelief. Like my brain refused to compute what I was seeing. Because if the picture was real, it meant someone had been in my room, right next to me, close enough to hear me breathe. And I hadn't woken up. I hadn't even stirred. Do you know what that does to a person? To realize you're not even the main character in your own life? That someone else can walk into your space, watch you sleep, take proof, and vanish before you ever notice? It makes you feel like prey. I tore through the house in a panic. Every room, every closet, even the basement. Nothing, nobody. And then I saw it. Another photo. On the kitchen counter. This one was darker, blurrier, but I could still make out the subject. It was me again. Only this time, I was sitting in the living room, watching TV, which meant it hadn't just been while I slept. He'd been there when I was awake, when I thought I was safe, close enough to hear the show, close enough to hear me laugh, close enough to take a picture. And I never noticed. Think about that for a second. If someone left a Polaroid of you on your bedside table, would you stay in that house? Or would you run out the door and never look back? Because I should have left. I know that now. But fear doesn't make you smart. Fear makes you freeze. I couldn't bring myself to call the police. What would I say? Someone left photos in my house, but I didn't see them. Don't know how they got in. and can't prove anything. So instead, I did the worst thing possible. I stayed, and I waited. And 2 nights later, there was another. This time, it was different. The third photo was taken from above, like someone was standing on the chair in my bedroom, holding the camera at an angle. In it, I wasn't just sleeping. I was smiling. Not a natural smile. Not one I remembered. My lips curled upward, stiff and unnatural, like someone had pressed their fingers into my cheeks while I slept and forced me to pose. I stopped sleeping after that. I couldn't. Every creak made me jolt awake. Every shadow stretched too long. But exhaustion is its own prison. Eventually your body takes what it needs. And that's when he struck again. The fourth photo wasn't just of me. It was of me with him. I don't know how he did it. Maybe he set a timer. Maybe someone else was helping him. But in the photo, he's standing right behind me. A thin, pale man, hunched over. His face half hidden by greasy hair. But you can see his smile. Wide, crooked, like he was proud of his collection. What would you do now? Would you scream? Would you call the cops? Beg them to believe you? Would you burn the whole place down just to know he couldn't crawl back inside? Or would you be like me? So trapped by fear, you convinced yourself maybe it was all some sick prank? Because by then, it was too late. The line had been crossed. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was playing. That was the night I realized I wasn't just dealing with an intruder. This wasn't a burglar or some squatter looking for food. This was someone who wanted to be seen. Someone who wanted me to know he was there. And the Polaroids were just his way of saying hello. That was my fourth mistake. I treated it like a message instead of the warning it really was. Because the next time, he didn't just leave pictures. He left proof I could never ignore. There's a point where fear stops being fog and turns into a map. Mine was drawn in ash, in missing food, in Polaroids. But a map only matters if you follow it. And to follow it, I needed proof. I told myself a story that sounded brave. If I catch him on camera, I'll know what to do. The truth, I was terrified the camera would show nothing, and I'd still be losing my mind. That was the challenge. Either I live with doubt, or I point a lens at it and let the truth burn my eyes. So I made a plan, a simple one. I bought 2 cheap cameras, one obvious, one hidden. The obvious one went high in the living room, pointing down the hallway toward my bedroom. The hidden one, I tucked low on a shelf, angled at the loose floorboard. Motion alerts on, infrared enabled, local storage, and a phone recording face down on the nightstand, set to capture audio from midnight to dawn. Not because I wanted a movie, because I needed a timeline. If you're ever stuck where I was, afraid, unsure, here's the solution that kept me sane. Control what you can. Light where it's dark. Notes where there's confusion. Cameras where there are blind spots. The benefit, fear stops being a shape under the bed and turns into a person you can name, describe, hand to a cop, and walk away from. The first night I set them up, nothing. The second night, nothing. The third night, at 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Hallway camera. I didn't check it then. I was too scared to move. I lay there, eyes open, listening to the same old sounds I'd been pretending not to hear. The hush of breath where there should be none. The soft rasp of wood. A knee sliding. And beneath all of it, a voice. Humming, off-key. At 6:11 a.m., as dawn thinned the edges of the windows, I got up, walked to the living room, and sat on the floor with the camera app open in my hands. I pressed play. It begins as grainy gray, infrared making the hallway look like a tunnel. For a long moment there's nothing, just the rectangle of my bedroom door at the end of the frame, and the darker rectangle of that loose board in the floor. Then the board rises, just a hair, then more. Fingers appear, thin, ash-stained. They hook the edge and lift, and he comes out. He moves like he's unfolding, too long for the space he's been living in. Greasy hair, sunken cheeks, clothes turn the color of floor dust. He doesn't look at the camera. He looks familiars with the dark. He plants his palms, crawls out onto the boards, and slides the plank back into place with a care that makes my skin crawl. Then he stands, and he waits, still as a nail. He pads to the kitchen first, opens my fridge. The light hits his face, flat and harsh. He squints. He eats like it's a ritual. 2 bites standing, 3 bites pacing, swallow on the 4th. He wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. Then with my dish towel, he takes a cigarette from behind the stove, lights it with a match, cupped like a secret. He doesn't blow the smoke away. He lets it climb. At 2:32 a.m., he walks down the hallway, past the lens, and turns into my bedroom. I switch to the second angle. The hidden one, low, pointed toward the loose board and the mouth of the hallway. It sees less, but it hears everything. There's a soft sound of shoes on carpet. Then nothing. Then the sound of my own breath, steady, steady, and then a tremor, like some part of me knew. At 2:41 a.m., there's another sound, a plastic click, the Polaroid. He takes a picture. The motor whirs. He waits. My sleep murmur. His whisper. There you are. He says it like he found something he'd lost. At 2:57 a.m., he leaves the room. The hallway camera catches him again. He stands in the corridor for a while, like he's listening to the house breathe. Then he does something I still don't understand. He turns to the lens, but he doesn't look into it. He looks just beside it, like he knows where the blind spot is. And he smiles, not at me, at the idea of me. If you saw that, if you watched someone emerge from under your floor, stand over your bed and smile at your camera, would you run? Would you charge into the hallway swinging? Would you sit there, like I did, too cold to move because your body can't decide between flee and freeze? I didn't run. I watched. And at 3:03 a.m., he did the one thing that stripped away the last of my denial. He reached for the hallway camera, not to yank it down, not to smash it. He straightened it, a neat little adjustment, like a host making sure a picture frame is level before guests arrive. Then he crouched by the loose board, and I watched him lift it again. He didn't go down right away. He spoke first, not to me, to the dark, to whatever version of me he carries around under there. The audio crackles, my phone mic struggling in the quiet, and in that static, you can still hear it. Good night. He slides beneath the floor. The boat settles back, like a held breath released. The house goes still. At 6:11 a.m. I pressed stop. I copied the files. I labeled the clips. I wrote the times on a sheet of paper with a marker that bled through. I made coffee I didn't drink. I sat at the table with my keys in my hand and waited for the sun to admit it had seen what I'd seen. If this ever becomes your life, here's what you do next. Because this is where the benefit of proof becomes survival. Don't confront him. He knows the terrain better than you do. Back up the footage to at least 2 places. Cloud if you can. Thumb drive if you can't. Document everything. Time, smells, missing items, photos, messages. Leave the house before you make the call, if it's safe to do so. You collect the truth, and you carry it outside. I wish I could tell you I walked out right then, that I dialed and said the magic words that fix things. But fear is not a straight line. It loops. It circles the drain. I sat there for an hour listening to the camera's faint fan and my own pulse in my ears. And then my phone lit up. New motion detected. 7:19 a.m. I looked at the live view. The hallway was empty. The board was flush. Everything was quiet. Then the frame tilted, just a little. A shiver of angle, like a hand had brushed the camera on its way past. It was enough. That was the benefit the truth had promised me. A reason not to doubt, not to delay, not to make up kind of stories. I stood. I picked up my keys. I walked out the door. And from the front steps, with the sun finally on my face, I made the call. When I finally called, my voice shook so badly, the dispatcher asked me if I was safe right then. I said yes. But the truth was, I wasn't sure. I'd left the house. But the house hadn't left me. Every sound outside felt like a continuation of the footage. Every creak of a branch, every passing car. My body was vibrating with it. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers in pressed uniforms, one young, one older, both with the skeptical look you expect when you say, "There's someone living under my floorboards." But then I showed them the photos, the footage, the log I'd written, every timestamp, every smell, every noise, and their faces changed. The older one said nothing. The younger one muttered, "Jesus." They didn't rush in, guns drawn. It wasn't like a movie. They moved slow, careful. One stayed with me outside, notebook in hand. The other went in with his radio crackling at his shoulder. I could hear the floor creak under his boots. Doors opening. Silence. Then the voice on the radio. "I've got movement." The next sound, I'll never forget. The hollow rip of wood. A grunt, the younger officer shouting, "Out! Out now!" Then the scraping. He was clawing his way out of the boards like a rat, pulled from a trap. The house shuddered with it. And then, silence. They had him. When I finally dared to step inside, he was on the floor in the hallway, thin, filthy, knees drawn to his chest like a child being scolded. His eyes didn't dart around like you'd expect. They stayed fixed on me, calm, unblinking, and on his lips, That same crooked smile from the Polaroid. The officers pulled him up. His body sagged like a puppet with tangled strings. He didn't fight, didn't argue, just shuffled forward when they guided him, still staring at me like I was the trespasser. They asked his name. He gave it quietly, like it wasn't the first time he'd spoken it in that hallway. And then, the older officer looked at me and said the words that still make me sick. He's the previous tenant. That house had been his. He'd been evicted months before I ever signed the lease, but he never really left. While the paperwork said the house was mine, the walls, the boards, the crawl spaces, they belonged to him. He knew every groan, every draft, every blind corner. And for weeks, maybe months before I noticed, he'd been there, waiting, watching. The police led him out to the car. I watched his head duck as they guided him into the back seat. But even then, he twisted his neck at an angle that didn't look natural. Just to keep his eyes on me. That stare burned deeper than the cigarette smoke, deeper than the photos, because it said, "You didn't find me. I let you." Would you ever set foot in that house again? Because I didn't. I walked in with the police. I walked out with them. And I never went back. I left everything, furniture, clothes, dishes. I didn't want one thing that man had touched, and yet I still brought him with me. Because you don't leave behind the feeling that your home was never yours, that your sleep was never private, that your silence was never empty. That was my sixth mistake. I thought it was over. But you don't just evict something like him. You carry it with you until it finds a way back. When the police drove away, I told myself it was finished. The house was behind me. The nightmare boxed up in their back seat. For the first time in weeks, I slept. Not well, but I slept. And when I woke, the air didn't taste like smoke. The floor didn't breathe. The silence was mine again. I thought I was free. But monsters don't live in basements or under beds. They live in memory. They live in the questions you never get answers to. And mine found a way back. It was a month later. I was in my new place. Smaller, brighter, louder, with neighbors on every side. No loose boards, no silence heavy enough to crush me. I'd convinced myself it was all just a bad chapter. Until my phone buzzed. A Facebook notification, a message request, no profile picture, no friends, just a name I didn't recognize. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. And inside was one sentence. "You moved out too soon. I wasn't done watching you yet." There was no photo, no proof, just the words. But that was enough. Because it meant he was out. Because it meant he still had me. The police had taken his body, but his eyes were still on me. Would you change your name? Delete your accounts? Move again and again and again until you ran out of places to hide? Or would you sit there like me, phone glowing in your hand, realizing some stories don't end, they just follow? That's why I'm telling you this. Because people think monsters look like claws and teeth. But sometimes they look like a neighbor you never noticed, a tenant who never left, a shadow under the floor that waits until you're asleep. And when they're gone, they're not gone. They're waiting for the silence. If you've made it all the way here, that means you stayed with me through the silence, through the boards, through the photos, through the eyes that never blinked. That means you're not afraid of the dark. Or at least, you're willing to look at it. But here's the truth. Stories like this don't end. They don't tie themselves off with neat bows or Hollywood endings. They linger, they echo, they stay under your skin. That's why I tell them. Because pretending monsters aren't real doesn't make them go away. But looking them in the eye at least gives you a chance to be ready. So now it's your turn. What would you do if you found the photos on your nightstand? What would you do if your house smelled like smoke when you've never smoked a day in your life? What would you do if the silence in your own room wasn't really silence at all? I search for these stories, the ones people bury in throwaway accounts, the ones police reports never make public, the ones you think can't happen to you, until they do, and then I bring them here, to you, so you don't have to dig through the dark alone. If you want more of them, the ones that stay with you, the ones that creep back into your head when you're trying to sleep, then subscribe, stay close, because I promise you this, the stories aren't stopping, they're only getting darker. But one warning, don't watch at night, not unless you're absolutely sure you're alone.